whatever the organization, whatever the role, like as long as you understand what that meaning of work is and you can share that out, ideally through to employee testimonials because they're trusted more, then you're sharing out your different value pillars in a way that is building your reputation for you.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok for the time being, and goodmorninghr.com. As the competition for choice talent, and not just warm bodies, continues to rise, many companies are recognizing the need to burnish their reputation with potential employees by building an employer brand. They're also recognizing that the job seeker market isn't the only consumer for the employer's brand. It's also necessary to tell the company's story to the internal market, their current employees. And joining me today to discuss employer branding is Crystal Lay. Crystal is the Chief Brand Officer and Chief Executive at GBS Worldwide, an end-to-end talent attraction firm specializing in employer branding, recruitment marketing, media management, and organizational talent transformation. In addition to her more than 20 years of people leadership experience, Crystal has earned her Master's in Leadership and Organizational Innovation and is pursuing a Master of Science in Organization and Business Psychology. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Crystal.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I feel like I can die a happy person now. I have achieved all my dreams.
Here you are. So when we're talking about employer brand, that's more than a logo for my HR department. So what is employer brand when we're talking about something that's actually effective and useful for the company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, your employer brand is more or less your reputation as an employer, and it's co-owned by an organization and the employees that work there, whether that's contract, perm, full-time, part-time, doesn't really matter. Everybody that interacts from an employment perspective with your organization has some ownership, like it or not, over what that reputation looks like, because we can't really own a reputation, right? Like we're not the ones that get to own that. Right. Everybody else really sets your reputation based off of their perceptions of your behavior.
So everything from what employees tell their friends over dinner about their job to what they post on Glassdoor to whatever we as an organization happen to post on the internet, whether it's our social media or our job postings. It's that whole range.
It's the end to end. I used to this is going back a few years now, but we used to talk about it in terms of that song, Jenny 8675309, the stuff in the bathroom wall, right? Like all of that is reputation. Now, granted, that's Jenny's reputation, different thing. But wherever you can put information about someone out into the world or an organization out into the world, like it impacts the overall reputation. And so employer brand is really saying like, hey, there's a lot of different ways that we're perceived by the world as, a service provider or consumer goods or whatever it is that we sell, whatever puts us in business, as a member of the community, right? Because every organization is part of a broader community. As an employer brand is really just looking at that employment perspective. That's it.
So there are a lot of factors outside of an employer's direct control affecting their brand. And, I mentioned Glassdoor, and that's, the bane of existence for, many employers, and how your employees are going to talk about you. So if I feel like I've got a poor employer brand, if we're not seen in the marketplace as a place that people necessarily want to work, as an employer, that seems like a pretty steep hill to climb to change that. Certainly I can say, oh, we're a great place, and here's the proof of why we're a great place to work. But really changing that sounds like, changing culture. I guess we all have an employer. It's like values. Every organization has values. Mm-hmm. And whether you wrote them down or not, you've got values, you've got the behavior incentivized. So I guess we all have an employer brand. Maybe we've not really recognized it, or we've not tried to shape it, but how do you go about doing that? Once we realize our brand isn't exactly what we want, it's not attracting the kind of talent we want, then how do we go about changing it when it's so much of it seems outside of our immediate control.
You have such a wonderfully nuanced question there. There's a lot to unpack. So let's.
That's my superpower. Ask one question and listen to an answer for 10 minutes.
It's totally fine.
Take your time.
You did well. Okay, so let's unpack this. So let's start with, yes, everybody has a reputation. Now the question is, did you intentionally try to craft and shape that? Are you managing that reputation, or is it just completely organic and managed for you? Right? And that's the difference. So when you recognize that, hey, what's being managed for me, or maybe even what we've crafted, isn't yielding the results we need, then yes, it's time to stop and start to unpack where you are, look at what's creating the dissonance between who you think you are and what your reputation says you are, and create some strategies to fix that. Now, to do that is a multi-discipline exercise, right? It's a little bit of org psych. It's a little bit of HR and culture and change management, right? It's a little bit of marketing. It's a lot of recruiting. So there's a lot of different pieces to this. So I get asked a lot, like, who should own employer brand? And the answer is like everyone and no one, right? I mean, the reality is it's not something that can be truly owned by just one person or department. You can have a shepherd for your employer brand, right? And so rather than looking at it as a tight ownership, because marketing tends to go in and go like me, and HR goes me, and then they fight. So rather than looking at it as ownership, perhaps the steward should be where the biggest part of the problem is. And that may shift from time or like over time, right? So initially, if the problem that's driving that is a massive PR, issue, and I often see this when there's like workplace accidents where somebody may have lost life and limb, or somebody gets nailed, an organization gets nailed because the products they were selling maybe aren't so great for the public, or there was some sort of scandal. Like, that's a PR problem that can impact employment, but probably should be managed by marketing, because PR is going to shape a lot of those solutions. All of my TA people are hating me at this exact moment, I'm just going to say. But that doesn't mean they need to own it forever, because at some point, it's going to shift back to being a talent attraction and retention issue that's going to be best shepherded by HR, talent attraction, TA, recruiting, however that's set up in your org. Wherever it lands as far as who's going to shepherd it, the first thing you really need to do is understand the fracturing of that reputation. And usually, not always, but usually it starts with, we don't understand who we really are. We know what we sell. We know the kind of jobs we offer. We know more or less what we think the employment experience is, but we don't necessarily understand our value. And this is where 20, 30 years ago, we had a massive disservice done to us in the industry, because some very, very bright marketing consultants said, ooh, we can expand our portfolio of services to companies by creating this shiny EVP that's really a marketing exercise as opposed to something that's going to drive business revenue, which is an org psych exercise.
And time out, by EVP, you mean employee value proposition, right?
Employer value proposition. Okay. Yep. We can settle that one, by the way, because that is a constant debate. Is it employer value proposition or employee value proposition? The answer is, for employer brand, it's employer value proposition. The value proposition is the what are you offering to someone else, the what's in it for me of your audience, right? So the employee is not going to give you the what's in it for me for themselves.
They're not delivering the value. I'm telling them this is what our value is as an organization.
Right, or this is the belief of what our value is, right? Like this is the ideally it would be, this is the my brain just broke. This is the shared understanding of our value between the organization and the workforce, right? Ideally, you want that to be shared. And that's really important. What we're talking about there is person-environment fit or alignment. Both exist. So that's an organizational psychology construct. And the thought behind PE fit, person-environment fit, is that before someone comes to work for you, and even really after they work for you, they don't truly care about organizational values. They care about their values, particularly before they come to work for you, because they're not bought into your Kool-Aid yet. So you want to be able to speak to their individual values. Why is that important? Because in the environment, if you're not able to help them live out their own personal values, like if they're not able to experience the fulfillment of those values in your environment, they will never self-actualize and become sticky. into your environment, right? So that's going to impact your attrition, your retention, and your productivity and engagement, right? Productivity and engagement is what makes you money. So we want to be able to attract the people who are going to be able to live their values out in our work environment. When we have that alignment and we have that harmony, EVP and subsequent employer brand moves from a, hey, maybe we can bump this needle up on our revenue about 5% to about a 28% change, right? Fully actualized. So you're talking about a 3-year program there, but it's a whole thing. And there's a lot of research and study and true academic statistics around this that'll be able to show you like, yes, this is achievable. Most agencies don't build that way, right? So most organizations don't have that, right? Or if they do, they kind of fell into it, right? Typically the way that it gets built, is a bunch of people sit around a table and say, this is what we're comfortable with, and this is what we think our people are, this is what we think they'll do.
Or this is what we aspire to be. This is who, I don't want to own a company that's like what we really are. I want to own a company that's all shiny on a, mountain on a.
Yeah. And that's such a disservice to the organization and the people in it. Why? Because this is going to be controversial. There are no bad cultures. There are bad representations of cultures. Now, there are bad fits in cultures that create toxic environments because everybody's misaligned, right? But the organization in and of itself, there are people that will be attracted to almost everything. Now, let's take out the extremes because I could hear the people in the background going, what about the sweatshops? What about the people that like have people sleep in their car or pee in bottles while they're working? Yeah, okay, that's bad. That's always going to be bad. But that's also like a fraction of a percentage of the overall workforce. Most environments aren't good or bad. They're just environments. And you either get alignment, which creates this lovely synergy around your employees. They're bought into what you're doing. They're excited to be there, assuming your pay and all of those things are what they should be, right? And you have a good brand outside of that, right? Because they're happy to be there. As much as anyone is happy to work for 2/3 of their working day, they're happy to be part of that organization. And it reflects. When it's misaligned, you hear people talking about that misalignment and the grumpy. Why? Because we are 9 times more likely as human beings to talk about that which we are just dissatisfied with than that which we are satisfied with. So that's kind of, I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but that's more or less the essence of it.
Yeah, and I've seen that, like, I really like what you said about no bad culture, with the exception of, the boss who sexually harasses his people and we all live with it. All those things that we know are just bad behavior. But how many times have we seen someone say that's a toxic culture there? I hate, and blah, blah, blah. And you realize, well, no, it's a very competitive culture. It's a sales-oriented culture. It's a winner-take-all culture. But that's what they reward and that's where they thrive. And that's not necessarily bad, but maybe you were just a bad fit. That was a toxic culture for you. And like just, 100 feet under the ocean water is a great culture for the fish. It's a horrible culture for me. I don't want to spend too much time there. And so I think that's a really good point that, certainly there are cultures that are just, but somebody talks, they talk about the tech culture or, working at what, name the big company. Oh, it was horrible. It was, this company was awful to work for, but it's not for the people who stay and for most of the people who really are successful there. And so what they're trying to do, I guess, through their employer brand is figure out how to attract more people who want to work in this culture and then strongly dissuade from even applying those people who don't fit our culture.
Right. And so now let's get back into employer brand. So once you build out your EVP, the next thing you do is you build out an identity framework, right? And so that's going to be how are we going to present this now our understanding of our person environment fit? How do we present that to the world? What's the messaging frameworks we're going to use? What are the visual expressions of that we need to put out into the world? How do we show all of the different functions and experiences and value pillars that we now know we have the ability to allow our people, not allow, but our people are able to live out in the organization? And so part of that is creating what's called hooks and counter hooks in our messaging, right? So hooks are the things that are going to draw in the people that you're trying to attract, the people that are going to excel within your environment, right? Because they're aligned. And then counter hooks are things that are intended to repel the people that are not likely to be able to thrive within your environment. A good book on this, like for if you're just starting out and you haven't read anything about employer brand, or maybe you don't know very much about it, but you want to understand the basic ideas of hooks and counter hooks, would actually be Bryan Adams and Charlotte Adams. I don't think she used her married name there. I don't remember what her maiden name was. Give and Get is the name of the book. It is definitely a beginner book, right? So like this is, you're not going to take this, read this, and then be like, I'm master of the brand. Not what it's intended to do, but it will help you have really great conversations with TA, with marketing, with your agency, and kind of help you understand like this is the process that we need to go through. Now, Bryan and I have different philosophies on how you construct EVP. Doesn't make him right, doesn't make me wrong, doesn't make me right, doesn't make him wrong. I just focus on the org psych piece of it, the org development piece of it. He focuses more on the marketing piece. So as you read through that, you'll see a difference in some of what I'm talking about versus how they build. That's okay.
So Bryan Adams, Give and Get, and we will put that in the show notes. I will trust Marianne Hernandez, my amazing marketing coordinator, to find that on Amazon and include the link. So it'll be there in the notes, guys.
They will love that. So that's a good thing to do. So let's back to hooks and counter hooks. So they talk about that. That's the attraction repel piece. When we're looking at counter hooks, like I don't need to say you won't do here if you don't have but. Right? I don't need to do that. What I need to do is say things like, for example, one organization that we work with is like every day is kind of like a friendly competition. I am constantly trying to outdo the people around me while knowing they're going to support me as I get my wins, and I'm going to support them as they get theirs. I've said a lot from a value perspective in just those few sentences. What I've said is this is a competitive environment. It's probably high performance oriented. They are probably constantly hustling. They compete with each other, but they also have some teamwork and cohesion, right? They can celebrate those wins together. So that'll feel attractive. That last part will feel attractive for most people, but for people who are introverted, people who are uncomfortable with high performance environments or competition, people who don't necessarily want to look at the leaderboard and see where they rank amongst their peers, I've sent out some messaging there that will repel them from applying without ever saying don't apply if, or you must have, right? The idea behind a good employer brand is hand over heart, not fist in the air or finger in the air, like it's always hand over heart. So we want to try to inspire more than we want to direct, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's interesting because like for our background screening side of the company, I am hiring the exact opposite of me. I'm hiring the introverts. You just said you wouldn't want in that example. And so we talk about working as one with compassion and respect. I'm looking for people who are not, who don't need a high level of ambiguity. They don't need to solve problems. They need to be able to put tab A and slot A repeatedly over and over with a high level of accuracy and precision. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about, those kind of things in the role. And then in our application process, we emulate that environment. So it's real detail oriented. So if an applicant bails after, because it's just too tedious to go through some basic questions, like somebody who's a high salesperson, who's, very quick and wants to talk about themselves and move on, they're going to, somebody with that, or somebody like me, I would never fight through that process. But we found that when the applicants who come through and demonstrate the competencies that we need and have the behaviors, we can attract those folks, and they work I could almost hire them by the time we've done our competency assessments and they've been through our employment application process. I could hire them without an interview almost. It's so good. And we see them self-select out, when somebody gets to that, we're asking, detailed questions about what they learned about in their previous jobs, or, tell me, about a time, and we're just giving them opportunity. I don't really care often what their answers are. I just want to see that they're taking the time to try to put a response together. And when they bail out, I'm dancing a jig because that was a good thing. And then the ones who fight through have turned out to be our best employees.
So a lot of what you're talking about there are the values of structure and role-related responsibility. Mm-hmm. And we do see that people, I mean, everyone needs that to some degree, right? So to some degree, we all need it. Now, how much we value it is going to change a lot from the ocean perspective, like where you fall on the ocean scale of personality. But that being said, so some things that I heard in what you're saying, like for your organization, I would look for, and I would bet your EVP assessment would bear out, role related responsibility, structure, stability are probably going to be pretty high.
Right.
And then maybe cohesiveness or unity as it relates to team.
Sociability is very low. I know we tell them, here's what your day looks like. You're going to be sitting in front of 2 or 3 computer monitors all day long, doing a lot of data entry, moving data from one source to our report management system, putting things in natural English in a concise but more verbose than copy and paste format, and just kind of describing. And again, trying to, it's as much trying to dissuade the people who wouldn't be good candidates as attract the ones who are the perfect fit.
Yeah. And so like some of the hooks that you might say, there's like, you will always know what your day looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to be able to be part of a routine and part of a team that's stable and does the same thing day after day after day. And for some people that will feel like a warm hug. And for other people, it will feel like you just dropped them in a vat of hot oil.
Yeah,
right.
That's
and
me.
So, yeah. So depending on whether or not they fit the environment for even that function or role, because again, when we look at an organization, it takes a lot of different types to be able to make everything work. And so you'll need some level of salespeople who are like, oh my God, please, no. Right. So that's a sub brand or sub EVP to your overarching, right? So you have functional EVPs and functional employer brand messaging to be able to account for those variances in function. But when you're taking your application process and making that part of your like assessment of do you fit in our culture, the one thing that I would note for most organizations, make sure you're disclosing that. Like, hey, you may not realize it, but you're about to experience what it's like to work here just in filling out this application. Why is that important?
Yeah.
So for someone who's neurodivergent, as an example, I think it's important for a lot of people, but for people who are neurodivergent, they really need to understand the whys. Not every neurodivergent diagnosis, I'm making a generalization, but a lot of them need to understand, why am I doing this? For someone with attention deficit disorder who may actually be really good at your job, but still have ADHD, if you're asking for a lot of investment up front and it's not reciprocal investment, because it sounds like you're asking for a lot of investment before you give them something back, right? So they need to understand that why, or they won't see the point of putting that time in, right? For someone with autism, where paranoia is at times a facet of that diagnosis, for some people, again, autism is a spectrum. So let me put that disclaimer up front. Not everybody's going to have this issue. But for people who do maybe have some slight paranoia through there, they may not understand. It may feel invasive to have to answer all of these questions, particularly before they've talked to someone to understand the ask. So a lot of, which is not to say that your system or process is bad, and you may actually do that. But a lot of companies will hide little pieces of their, I say hide because it's just not disclosed, little pieces of their process into the upfront parts of talent attraction without any kind of disclosure to it, without any kind of explanation to it. And then they're shocked when people are really turned off by their brand. It's like, well, you didn't manage that part of your brand.
Right.
You just kind of did something that had a whiffum for you, but not explaining what was in it for them. And there was something in it for them. So had you said, hey, we're going to go ahead and get started with this whole recruitment process right now. Your first assessment is actually part of your application process. Or we want you to go solve this riddle, which was in vogue like 2 years ago, to be able to get to our application. And it'll show us A, B, and C. They probably would have done that. There would have been a much better brand perception. It would have increased the candidate experience, right? They would have had more brand fans come out of that, as opposed to, what is this, right? Which will increase the ghost rate, and it'll ultimately decrease the overall reputation. So those are the things that you want to work on when you're building out your employer brand strategy. Do I need to test out their alignment to EVP pillars? And what are the different ways that I can do that before I actually bring them in for an interview? There's several different ways. Some of it is just like the natural attraction and repelling in your messaging. You can build in all kinds of different little interactions through your recruitment process. I personally like having, depending on the organization, if an organization wants to be able to start embedding them into their culture prior to even really getting them into the full recruitment process, having them interact with social channels can be a way to do that. Building out a community. I've built hundreds of those over the years, where we even put candidates into communities to be able to interact with different people. Now, building a community at this point, in this stage of the game with all of the different social platforms, building your own community may not necessarily be necessary. You could build a subreddit, right, where you're talking about the benefits of background checks, Mike, or where you're talking with candidates about like how to be able to solve coding language and natural linguistics issue, like that kind of thing. Find something that's relevant to the topical matter of what you're recruiting for. We have a client that works in real estate. So having an investment real estate forum where people can talk about just investment real estate with each other can be great. And then encouraging candidates to go there and get involved with that conversation. And they can see, okay, how good they are they at interacting with people they don't know? Are they able to be proactive in making those kind of contacts? Like there's things that they can assess there without actually ever making it part of the application. Conversely, candidates are able to assess how comfortable am I with this kind of thing. If the organization says, hey, this is really how we market and how you're going to get leads and how you're going to be able to close things out, go get in there and start having some of these conversations and feel how comfortable that is or not to you. If you like it, go apply. Right? Then they can look at it and say, yeah, that works for me, or no, it really doesn't. And it's not a formal assessment. It's just an opportunity. They can apply either way. Right?
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. For 25 years, Imperative has helped risk-averse clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. Whether that means very thorough pre-employment background checks, due diligence for family offices or private equity firms, or any other kind of business due diligence, if there are people involved, there's risk involved. We help businesses mitigate that risk. You can learn more at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 142 and enter the keyword brand. That's BRAND. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Crystal Lay. So, owning that conversation space, whether it's a subreddit that that you're an admin on, or a Facebook group, or wherever your people are, wherever you're finding, that seems like it'd be really practical for a larger employer with critical mass as far as audience and employee population. If you're a small to medium-sized business, what is there value from just paying attention and participating in the Evil HR Lady Facebook group, or any of those other things, and just being active there, and talking about your issues and responding to issues that employees may be having in other organizations?
Sure. I think there's value in knowledge wherever we can get it, right? And so one really important thing to note is that if you use anything as an assessment that's not part of your application process, you have to disclose that, and it leads to some murky stuff. So to me, the value of the community and those kind of things, like, yes, you can get some insights that you can then talk to them about once they apply. But it should not be a screen in or screen out tool. It's really the idea of it is to help, when we're talking about brand, it's to help people understand your brand and to help you get some insight into conversation that you can have to see how aligned they are into your organization or not. So do you need to own it? No, you don't. I think the more populated personally, and this is a personal preference, it's totally subjective. The more populated the community, the better off you're going to be because the more varied the conversation. There are times where that doesn't work. Defense contractors, for example, or people that are formulating drugs, I'll throw out, Eli Lilly as an example. I would never say, oh, Eli Lilly, go put your formulations online. And they would never do it, right? But you could absolutely tie back to a scientific community for chemists where they talk about spending their entire career working on one part of one formula. Sure. Right? They may never see their drug go to market. And what does that feel like to know that you're part of a body of work that's going to extend beyond your career? Right? So that's a way that you can have some of those conversations without actually getting into assessments. But the bottom line is, however you do it, whatever you do, you want to make sure the point of it is they get to experience facets of your culture, facets of what it's going to be like in your work environment to see how the alignment is for them. They get to judge just as much as you do.
So we talked a little bit about the gap. Who owns this employer branding? Is it marketing and sales, or is it HR, or does it we volley back and forth? But that employer brand, just so it doesn't create dissonance, needs to somewhat align, right, with the corporate, the bigger sales brand of the organization. I would think there's need to be some alignment there. I mean, if all our marketing is saying for our customer base, people who spend money on us, that we're bringing peace to the world and kumbaya and all of that, and then our marketing is to the prospective employee population is we're cutthroat, we're very highly competitive. Do those need to be integrated, or does it not create a dissonance in the environment outside the organization?
So I'm not going to say that customers don't ever look at your employment marketing, because some do. Most don't. I mean, we have literally, as human beings, we have an attention span that is super short. So most of us spend our days going through what do we need to make it through our day for us, right? There are people that will do that kind of research. They're massively in the minority. Does that mean you shouldn't care for it all? No, probably not. But
what about on the employee side?
Well, on the employee side, oh yeah, they look at both, but most people understand marketing, right? Understand the fact, let me step that back. I'm going to walk back that sentence just a little bit. Most people understand that when you're marketing a product or service, you are marketing a product or service, right? That's why brands tend to have less authority and trust rating than an employee. That's why sites like Glassdoor matter. In her site, the Muse, all of these places where you're able to get third-party reviews, like the reason they work and the reason that they're successful is because we trust people more than brands, right? And why? Because we know brands are marketing. Marketers be marketing. That's their job. So is it okay if there's dissonance between the two? Sure, because they're completely different experiences. If a company is worried about that, like to use your example, like as you were talking, I said, yeah, I would stick up a landing and like almost an interstitial page that popped up between the company side to the talent side that says, how do we find peace through war? Oh. I don't know that I would actually make stuff look like a war zone, but you know what I mean? Like,
it's hard work. It's a real hard grind and to achieve the peace that we're talking about doing. Yeah, I mean that's
right. Peace isn't achieved through peace. Peace is achieved through hard work and sacrifice, and sometimes going to war. Right? Like again. Yeah. No, I don't know that I would ever equate my employment to war, but unless maybe you're a defense contractor.
There you go.
Yeah. But the point is, like, there can be dissonance. You just have to explain the dissonance, right? So, if my brand is all butterflies and sunshine, to get butterflies and sunshine, I have to build an ecosystem where they can thrive. So just explain the dissonance between there, right? So that's doable in every environment. That's doable. And we've worked with some brands where it was like, oh my God, how do we explain this? The reality is you don't have to come up with a complicated explanation. Your team knows why, right? So when part of doing that EVP research, part of the reason that it is so important to invest in a solid EVP is to understand why there might be dissonance between your corporate values and your employment values. And chances are part of that is because your experience, your customer experience is very different than your work experience, right? That's okay. We just need to understand it. And if we understand what that dissonance is, then we can explain it. And we can explain it in a way that's not explaining it away. It's just explaining this is the reality. And here's the benefit of being part of that reality. And now we get into meaning of work, right? So we understand this is why it is. And when you come into this room with us, when you come into this experience with us, here's what you get out of it. Like the work we do impacts the broader world, our customers or whatever, this way. And our employees feel a sense of pride, fulfillment, excitement, whatever, depending on the organization, because they're part of making whatever that is happen to the world. So for example, we worked with a manufacturer who does a lot of food formulations. And so for their people, like they couldn't talk about the brands that they were working with because the company itself was the behind the scenes partner.
They were the white label, right? Yeah.
Right. They were the formulators. And so so they couldn't say like, oh, I'm part of, this restaurant or this coffee place or whatever. That was private. So what they could say is like, we know we're part of nourishing the world. Like we're part of what makes sure that people are not just fed, but they have experiences while they eat. And that feels really good, right? So whatever it is, and this is true for every position and organization across the world. I've had janitors talk to me and talk about how like, I know if I'm out of work for 3 days, no one comes to the office because it stinks. I enable work. Like, that's awesome, man. You understand the meaning of work. This is great. Like that's the meaning of your job and it has real meaning. Like, yep, CEO will not show up. Nor will anyone else if the place stinks. Okay, cool. So whatever the organization, whatever the role, like as long as you understand what that meaning of work is and you can share that out, ideally through to employee testimonials because they're trusted more, then you're sharing out your different value pillars in a way that is building your reputation for you.
Perfect. Well, there's so much to talk about. You touched on your. I know you've done a lot of research around neurodiversity. You touched on that. I want to get you back just to talk about that issue. That's one that's near and dear. And we just had David Aspinall from Auticon on not long ago, and I really want to do a deeper dive on that. I'd love to talk about some of the employee retention sides of employer branding and those things and getting those aligned. But that's all the time we have right now. So thank you for joining me today, Crystal.
Oh, thank you. And I'll come back anytime.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.